This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. In a shocking twist no one saw coming, Wendy Williams, the queen of hot topics, the one they tried to silence, has now taken the stand in federal court. After decades of rumors, suspicions, and relentless industry backlash, Wendy is finally putting it all on record. Her testimony isn't just about Diddy. It's about a pattern of protection, silence, and systemic abuse in hip-hop and entertainment. From Jay-Z to R. Kelly, from radio blackballing to NDAs, Wendy came armed with dates, quotes, and chilling recollections. This wasn't a tabloid segment. This was a bombshell deposition under oath, with everyone listening. What she said about Diddy, Jay-Z, and their twisted connection could tear down an entire industry. Buckle up, because Wendy Williams just turned the courtroom into her purple chair. When Wendy Williams entered the courtroom, it didn't feel like a celebrity appearance. It felt like the arrival of someone who had been buried alive and clawed her way out, just to finally tell the truth. She wasn't here for headlines. She wasn't here for drama. She was here because, for years, the media tried to silence her with lawsuits, threats, blackballing, and mockery. And now, all those warnings, all those rumors she put out on her old radio show, were part of a federal investigation. She sat down, looked directly at the jury, and adjusted her microphone with a calm but deliberate pace. I was never messy. I was never bitter. I was never lying. I was early. Wendy wasted no time reminding the court why she was there, to testify under oath about the behaviors, threats, cover-ups, and patterns she had long accused Sean Diddy Combs of orchestrating. When I first started talking about Diddy, she said, I wasn't trying to tear him down. I was trying to wake people up. The courtroom watched as she placed a stack of papers in front of her, printouts of old show transcripts, emails from executives, and a timeline of everything Diddy allegedly did to shut her down. She started in the early 2000s. He was protected. Everybody knew it. You couldn't talk about Puff without a phone call coming in an hour later. She detailed moments where station managers warned her, advertisers pulled out of her show, and threats were made in subtle but unmistakable ways. You're doing too much, Wendy, they'd say. You're going to get hurt, Wendy. She described being chased, quite literally out of her radio station by a girl group allegedly sent by Diddy himself. Total. I said they were broke, and within hours, they were waiting for me outside my building. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. Wendy described her career like it was a war zone. Every time I exposed something about Diddy, from his parties to the way he treated his artists, something in my world would collapse. A sponsor, a syndication deal, a network invite. Gone. But I refused to back down. She leaned forward. You can blackball me, you can threaten me, but you can't erase me. And now I'm under oath. So I hope they're listening, because I'm not stopping until the truth is loud enough to shut their machine down. When the prosecution asked Wendy about the culture surrounding Diddy, she pivoted toward someone else she had long warned the public about, Jay-Z, and her tone sharpened. You can't talk about what Diddy did without talking about the people who stood next to him, smiled with him while the abuse was happening. That includes Jay-Z. Wendy's eyes scanned the jury before she leaned in. Y'all remember Foxy Brown? She was 15. Jay-Z was 27, and he was everywhere with her. She pulled out lyrics from Foxy's debut album, songs Jay-Z reportedly wrote. Ain't no nenya like the one I got. No one can do me better. She read aloud deliberately. The courtroom recoiled. You tell me, she continued. Why was a grown man writing those lyrics for a child? She continued with details only someone from the industry could know. Rumors of Jay picking Foxy up from high school, lavish gifts, shopping sprees, and hair appointments funded by a man almost twice her age. This wasn't a label signing. This was grooming. Then Wendy dropped something even darker, an alleged tape. There was a rumor for years that a tape existed. Jay-Z, Foxy, and Jamie Foxx. You never heard about it again. Why? Because suddenly, Foxy's home was burglarized. The tape, gone. She let the words hang in the air. Coincidence? I think not. Wendy said she was fired from her top-rated radio show shortly after suggesting that Jay-Z's relationships with underage girls needed to be investigated. They called me toxic, but now you're seeing that everything I asked was worth asking. The prosecution then asked if she had any concrete evidence. Wendy nodded. Emails, call logs, producers who backed out of my show when I brought up Jay's name. She told the court that Jay-Z's team made quiet calls to industry insiders to blacklist anyone who spoke about Foxy. They turned me into the villain, she said, just for asking what any decent person should have asked. Then she turned to the jury. You think I lost sponsors for being messy? No, I lost sponsors because I was right, and they couldn't let that spread. Next came what Wendy called the part nobody wanted to believe, the part that had her labeled as a liar, a loudmouth, and worse. She told the court, I was the first to say it. Those weren't parties. They were operations. She was referring to the infamous freak-offs, a term now central to the federal indictment against Diddy. Wendy said she first heard whispers about these events in the late 90s, when Bad Boy was at its peak. Phones were taken at the door. Guests signed NDAs. There were candle escorts, cameras. People were assigned to rooms. This wasn't a house party. It was a ritual. She referenced Karen Superhead Steffens, who told Wendy on air that Diddy invited her to one of these parties and asked for male involvement. Superhead didn't lie. She described everything. Diddy's paranoia, his drugs, the strange setups. She said he was afraid she'd expose him. Wendy leaned in again. And I made sure people heard that interview. I played it again and again because the truth was too heavy to let it pass. She described similar stories she'd heard from other guests, men and women, who had been to Diddy's parties and came back shaken. They didn't just party. They were told what to do, what to wear, who to touch, what room to go in. Wendy testified that she had personally spoken with 3 individuals who described IV bags being used to recover from the party, just as the court indictment now details. They said there were medical assistants on standby. This was not socializing, this was organized depravity. She produced a list, pseudonyms only, of people who'd given her their testimonies in private. The court was stunned. One by one, these events matched the very patterns described by Cassie Ventura, Gang Deal, and other witnesses in the case. Finally, Wendy said something that hit everyone hard. The baby oil. I said it on air as a joke, but it wasn't funny. They really found over 1,000 bottles, just like I said. You know why I knew? Because people told me, and I was the only one willing to say it. She sat back in the chair, composed, and looked over at Diddy. All these years later, and we're finally here. Now it's not gossip, it's evidence. As the courtroom grew more silent, Wendy Williams shifted focus to someone else she had been defending for years, Cassie Ventura. I said it back then, she declared, eyes never leaving the jury. Y'all were mesmerized by the diamonds, the music videos, the red carpets. But I saw a scared girl. I saw imbalance. And I said it on the air. Something about that relationship was off. Wendy testified that she had tried to warn her listeners as early as 2008 about the obsessive control Diddy allegedly had over Cassie. She was 19. He was pushing 40. That's not love. That's leverage. Wendy explained how the mogul's lifestyle, jets, private security, industry pull, made it nearly impossible for Cassie to leave. I said it then, and I'll say it now. She didn't need a boyfriend. She needed a bodyguard. She reminded the courtroom of a clip she played on her show years ago, where Cassie looked down during an interview and flinched when Diddy raised his voice. People called it nerves. I called it trauma, but nobody listened. The prosecution then entered into evidence a timeline of Wendy's broadcasts that paralleled Cassie's legal claims. I was told Diddy had access to her phones, that he'd show up at hotels unannounced, that he'd get staff to unlock her doors. She paused. And when I said that out loud, my show sponsors pulled the plug. Wendy then referenced a 2018 incident, the one where Cassie reportedly ended the relationship after Diddy allegedly forced his way into her home. That's not the first time he showed up uninvited. Wendy testified, "People don't understand. When a mogul wants control, they don't need permission. They make the world rearrange itself for them." She gave the court a chilling breakdown of how these mogul dynamics play out: grooming, isolating, leveraging industry influence, and forcing the illusion of luxury as a means of obedience. He didn't just love Cassie, he owned her. And when she broke the chain, she became dangerous. Wendy ended this part of her testimony by saying, "Everything in that lawsuit? I saw the signs. I said it publicly. And now she's finally being heard. But at what cost?" Wendy adjusted her mic again. Her voice didn't tremble, but it slowed. "You don't get to talk about men like Diddy and walk away clean. I knew that, but I didn't realize how deep it would go until it happened." She testified that in 2004, at the peak of her radio dominance, she received a message from a record label executive. "Stop talking about Puff, or else." Wendy didn't flinch. She kept going. The very next week, she was pulled from her afternoon time slot. They didn't even pretend it wasn't about him. She said it was punishment. Wendy revealed she'd heard from multiple sources that Diddy had made phone calls, strategic ones, to label heads, promoters, and radio networks, warning them to distance themselves from Wendy. She recalled one program director telling her bluntly, "You went too far. You poked the wrong bear." She spoke about how she was almost attacked in front of her own studio by the girl group Total, after she called them washed up and broke on air. "And you think they just showed up randomly? No, they were sent." Wendy recounted the moment in vivid detail. Fans pressed to the glass of the radio station lobby, her boyfriend at the time waiting in a car, her intern panicking. That wasn't just a confrontation, that was a message. "We can get to you." She then described how she was disinvited from BET events, denied media passes, and lost advertising deals. "It was all coordinated. Diddy didn't just want to stop me. He wanted to erase me." She brought out printed emails from PR firms representing Bad Boy at the time, each one distancing themselves from her platform. One email read, "Per client instruction, we will no longer be booking talent on Wendy Williams's show." "That client?" "Sean Combs," Wendy said, holding up the page. "I wasn't the first to be blackballed," she added, "but I was one of the few who stayed loud about it." She turned to the jury again. "That's what he does. If you speak, you lose everything. Your mic, your money, your name. But I didn't fold. I talked through the silence. And here I am." Wendy sat still for a moment before recounting a time that felt almost surreal in hindsight. "We come from a very homosexual era of hip-hop," she began, quoting her own past words. "That wasn't shade. That was truth. And for saying it, I was burned at the stake." She explained how, in the early 2000s, there was a quiet but undeniable effort to protect certain stars by shaming those who questioned them. "I had Charlemagne on the air with me, and even back then, we knew what not to say if we wanted to stay employed. But I said it anyway." She brought up her 2004 book, The Wendy Williams Experience, which was full of coded references and veiled warnings about Diddy, Jay-Z, and their after-dark lifestyles. People called it gossip, but now the government calls it evidence. Wendy then recounted a 2009 interview she did with former Bad Boy artist Mark Curry, who had just written Dancing with the Devil. He called Diddy the shadow that ruins people. I agreed, And suddenly that interview disappeared from the radio station's archives. She told the court that every time she tried to feature someone critical of the industry, Superhead, Gene Deal, Jaguar Wright, she got pushback. Emails, threats, even FCC complaints. They tried to shut me down through every angle they could. Then she dropped something that caught the court's attention. There was a list, not written down, but everyone in the industry knew it. A list of people you couldn't talk about. And when I broke that rule, I paid. She explained that her Hot Topic segments were constantly being flagged for review, that show producers were being threatened by talent reps, and that executives warned her, off the record, to back off. They said I was going to mess it all up for them, for the station, for myself. She paused. But now? Now it's all messed up anyway, because the truth is out. Wendy's voice lowered as she finished this part. This trial is not the beginning. It's the end of a cover-up. And I want the jury to know, I've been sounding this alarm for 20 years. You all just finally heard it. As Wendy looked back at the courtroom, her tone shifted again. Sharper now, more precise. You think this is just about Diddy? You're wrong, she said, locking eyes with the jury. This is about the ecosystem that protected him, and that includes names you were never supposed to hear in a courtroom. She took a breath. Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey. A collective stillness fell over the courtroom. The prosecution asked her to explain, and she did, with brutal clarity. There's a list in Hollywood, not one you'll ever see, not one you'll ever hold. But it's real. It's the list of people you do not cross. And if you do, you disappear. Wendy recounted the aftermath of her infamous radio segments, when she exposed not only Diddy's parties and manipulation, but also called out how Tyler Perry allegedly blackballed her behind closed doors. I had sources, real ones, producers, agents, and they told me flat out, Wendy, your name is being passed around. They don't want you touching certain topics. You're being labeled unstable. She explained that after her fallout with the Precious team, a film both Perry and Oprah were heavily involved in, her access in the industry collapsed. I went from getting invites to premieres to being wiped off the guest list. One executive told me, Oprah's people don't want you near her anymore. That's power. And that power was used to protect people like Diddy. Then came a chilling story. Wendy testified that she confided in Oprah once, privately, about her own past trauma with abuse. She told me she respected me, that she'd never exploit that story. And then next thing I know, my abuser was on her show being interviewed, while I was being blackballed. She continued, that wasn't just betrayal. That was retaliation. The jury looked stunned as Wendy laid it bare. They smiled with him. They took pictures. They stood beside Diddy while the rest of us were getting crushed for speaking out. And I know why. Because they needed him. For deals. For reach. For silence. She then revealed an email, accidentally forwarded to her, from a PR firm handling crisis communication for both Perry's studio and a Bad Boy affiliated brand. The subject line, Managing Optics, Wendy, Puff, Tyler. That was all it said, but that was all I needed. Wendy stared straight ahead. These aren't just isolated stars. They're a machine that feeds on silence and destroys anyone who dares pull the curtain back. By now the courtroom had grown tense with every word Wendy delivered. Then came a moment that prosecutors later called a turning point. Wendy pulled out a thick file folder. This, she said, tapping the cover, is a collection of NDAs, email threads, and internal memos that were never supposed to see the light of day. She clarified that she obtained them, not through hacking, but from industry friends who had long since left the game. They were tired of watching women disappear, tired of seeing truth labeled gossip. Wendy began reading from an NDA dated 2007, the name redacted, the language ominous. Subject agrees not to disclose any private gatherings, recordings, or interactions with Sean Combs, his guests, or associates. Violation of this agreement may result in financial penalties and public retaliation. She slammed the paper down. Public retaliation. That's how deep it went. Next, she read an internal email from a luxury hotel chain. We have prepared the presidential suite with all requested amenities, including extra linens, candle lighting, and discretion measures. Mr. Combs's assistant will arrive for setup prior to guest entry. The date on that email? 2015. Cassie was still with Diddy. Wendy asked, "You think this was just celebrity partying?" Number: This was a system. This was planned, funded, scheduled, and cleaned up afterward. She revealed that she had evidence of payments made to publicists, talent managers, even bloggers, all to manage the narrative. One email instructed a writer, avoid any reference to recent rumors and instead push an article on Diddy's philanthropic work. Then came a photo, one that prosecutors presented to the jury. Diddy, Tyler Perry, and a media consultant known for her crisis sweep services, all standing together at a 2019 gala. They were smiling, Wendy said. Smiling while women were getting paid to shut up, and others were getting destroyed for not signing. She told the court that she too was offered an NDA. They wanted to shut me up, said I could have a syndicated TV deal if I agreed to move on from the topics I was covering. I said no, and I paid the price. The jury was silent as Wendy concluded. The silence they bought cost others their freedom, their peace, their truth. And now, it's all unraveling, one NDA at a time. As Wendy Williams reached the final portion of her testimony, she didn't break. She didn't cry. She simply sat with the weight of 2 decades of warning the world and being ignored. You see Diddy on trial, she said, her voice calm and controlled. But I see something much bigger. This isn't just about what he did. It's about who let him do it. She gestured to the defense table. You see one man, but behind him is a legacy of silence, a tower built on fear, on NDAs, on power plays, and party invitations and billion-dollar handshakes. Then she turned directly to the jury. And every time someone tried to speak, that tower crushed them. She reminded the court that while Diddy was the one charged, others, Jay-Z, Perry, Oprah, the labels, the handlers, had sat quietly for years, some even watching the abuse happen firsthand. They shook his hand, they took his checks, and they made sure anyone who asked questions was pushed out the door. Wendy concluded her testimony with the same voice that made her radio show famous, commanding, raw, and unfiltered. I was called bitter. I was called crazy. But I was right. And I would rather be right in hell than be silent in heaven. She looked toward Diddy, who had remained mostly stoic through her testimony. You thought I was gone. You thought your power was enough. But now, you sit where the truth finally caught up to you. And I hope it's loud. Before stepping down, Wendy turned once more toward the gallery. This trial is not the end. It's the beginning of people finally naming names, of the walls cracking, and of the whole tower one day falling down. And just like that, she walked out.